Is Chrono Trigger worth playing in 2024? Obviously, the answer is yes. Any game with this level of fandom and legacy is going to be worth your time. But the question is, how good is it today? Following a year where you had games like Alan Wake 2, Baldur's Gate 3, and then smaller titles like Sea of Stars and Dave the Diver, how does Chrono Trigger stack up against those games, which may already be sitting on your backlog? In many ways, it's an unfair comparison since Chrono Trigger released so many years ago, but at the same time, we all only have so many hours in the day, and if I'm going to choose between Chrono Trigger and Dave the Diver, does Chrono Trigger actually hold up? With this series, which I'll talk more about at the end of the video, I'm going to be working through my backlog. These will not be games that I've played before, or at least not games that I've completed, so I won't have any nostalgia for them. That said, I'm well into my 30s and my backlog and tolerance for some tropes in older games will reflect that. So my backlog includes games like the original Castlevania series all the way up through Breath of the Wild 2. So there's going to be a lot of variety. So with that said, as someone who had never completed Chrono Trigger and just finished the game in 2024, nearly 3 decades after it was released, I can tell you it is an excellent game, and it absolutely is as good as everyone says. I wouldn't call it perfect, at least not for me, with some of that stemming from the Steam version of the game. However, there are things that Chrono Trigger does with its world, and particularly with time travel, that I'm not sure have been done as well in the last 29 years. I've started Chrono Trigger many times over there, and every time I've stopped about 5 or 6 hours in. Even after completing the game, I still feel like that first third where I kept getting stuck is the weakest part. The combat at that stage isn't all that interesting, with straight melee attacks being basically as effective as the techs, which are your abilities and spells. Often I found myself just spamming the default attack on every character until everything on the screen was dead. The story at that point was laying important groundwork, but outside of some scenes like the trial, I wasn't understanding why people loved this game so much. It was fun, and it is a beautiful game, but it wasn't really doing anything unique or special. The middle third of the game is far, far better. Your abilities and roster expand, enemies get more challenging, and bosses get far more interesting. The story is also done laying groundwork, and the thread is clear, or at least more clear. If the previous section had me wondering why Chrono Trigger was so well regarded, this section had me saying, "This is great, I get it now." Or at least I thought I did. By this point in the game, the time travel mechanic is in full swing, or so I believed. You're tackling problems across thousands of years, meeting new characters, and putting pieces into this puzzle that you can't quite fully understand yet. And I'm aware of how vague I'm being at this point with a game that's nearly 30 years old, but I just can't bring myself to spoil the experience for someone because nobody spoiled it for me. As many times as someone told me, "You really need to try Chrono Trigger again," or I think in the case of my brother-in-law, it was something closer to "What's wrong with you?" none of them talked about why this game is so good, and I believe that was intentional. So, like them, I'm trying to give enough information to hopefully help somebody decide if it's interesting for them, but at the same time, not so much that it spoils what this game is. Again though, at this point, as I entered the last third of the game or so, it had clicked for me. I kept thinking, okay, this is why people love this game. And then I got to the last third. The last third of the game is insanely good. If the second half of the game kicked it up a gear and skipped a couple gears along the way, the last third of the game just straps rockets to the car and cranks the music to 11. You will experience some of the best time travel mechanics I have seen in a game, period. With considerable thought going not just into setting up the time travel problem to solve, but also looking at what the impact of those actions would be. The game starts to throw more interesting gear at you, giving you interesting gear decisions to make. You also start to run into some side quests, particularly at the very end, that are excellent and give great rewards and also offer decent character building for a 90s RPG. The combat becomes an even more interesting puzzle to solve, although admittedly, it starts to become somewhat easy to outlevel the content, including the end bosses. So it's an excellent game, even by modern standards. However, I do want to touch on a few things that I didn't think were great or that didn't age very well. The first thing I'm going to bring up is the Steam version, specifically the default high-resolution graphics. The high-resolution graphics, while good in some areas, are terrible more often than not. Here you can see a scene with the standard graphics. Now you can see the same area with the high-definition graphics. The high-definition graphics are smoothed out in such a way that you kind of lose the definition that matters, and yet the edges are actually more defined, which prevents the tiles from actually blending with the others. The forest area is where I first switched to classic graphics, and I never went back. Additionally, I did have 2 crashes to desktop. If you look at the Steam reviews, there are people that had far more. Luckily, there is a bookmark system that is basically a state save system. It does save the state at different points, so I didn't lose too much progress. However, you could lose quite a bit depending on exactly when it happened. One more thing on the technical front that bothered me was the lack of ability to load a save from inside the game. The only way I could find to do it was to go to settings and then exit the game, which yes, that's where that's buried. Then start the game again, load the save I wanted, and go from there. It's not ideal when you just want to go back a little and undo a mistake, so I really would have liked to have seen something inside the game to actually load a save. I realized that probably wasn't a thing in the SNES version, but it would have been nice. Then there are some things that were standard for RPGs at the time that I just don't have the patience for today. One being the NPC you talked to 20 minutes ago made a reference to something important, but if you didn't catch it, now you're wandering around potentially for a half hour or more trying to figure out what you were supposed to do next. For me, I offset this with a guide in those moments. When the game was released, I would have had the time and the patience to wander around until I found an answer. I don't have that kind of time today. I don't want to waste 30 minutes backtracking trying to figure out what I missed. I only needed a guide for a couple quests where I just missed a clue in the dialogue. Additionally, I did use a guide towards the end to help find all the side quests and find some of the chests that you needed to backtrack for. So do with that information what you will. In a perfect world with infinite time, I would say with this game's New Game Plus mode in the PC version that it would be worth playing this game twice. Once with limited guide use, and another time going for completion. That said, a happy medium would be using the guide only for cleanup before the final push to finish the game. However, as I touched on a little earlier, too much of that in your first playthrough, and it can trivialize the encounters at the end, which was the case for me, and it was a bit unfortunate and a little too easy to do. Overall, if you are even remotely interested in playing through Chrono Trigger, you really owe it to yourself to play through. It isn't that long, coming in at about 26 hours if you're trying to complete everything, and you could definitely finish it faster than that. I would say it's not only worth playing in 2024, but it definitely deserves that place as required reading for any gamer that enjoys RPGs. So, with that out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about what I'm planning to do with this series. Unlike when I experimented with videos previously, trying to find a niche and start a channel, these videos are really for me. Or rather, they're in service of a goal I have, which is to chip away at my backlog or my pile of shame. And what I'd like to do is share that experience with others and let other people know which of these games still hold up today and deserve a spot in their backlog. Initially, I'm going to choose games that serve a good foundation for what this series should be, but after that, I eventually want to give some control over those who are actually watching the videos, to basically vote on what's next. I may pick 5 or 10 games that fit a theme, or I may go in alphabetical order, offering several D games for people to choose from, and what they'd like to see a video on, and potentially what games they themselves have on their backlog that they may want to play alongside as I'm kind of running through them myself. Likely using comments on the videos initially, and if there's interest, I may start a Discord or something like that where I can kind of collect information. Then I'll make a video about that game, giving my thoughts on how it holds up, and offer some potential games that I may play next. That isn't to say all the games will be older games. My backlog has plenty of new games as well. Additionally, I may have another series that's more dedicated to new games, but these will likely be less frequent, and it will take the form of more of a discussion piece. For example, I recently finished Dave the Diver, and I will likely make something on it, but it will be more to discuss elements of gameplay than just an overview of the game. Additionally, I play a fair number of co-op games, and I may have a separate series of videos dedicated to highlighting good co-op games, as they can be really difficult to find. So with that said, the next backlog game I'll be tackling will be A Plague Tale: Innocence. If you've never played it, but maybe it's also in your backlog, maybe install it, and in a week or so would love to hear what you thought of it in that video. If you've already played it, anything I should be looking out for, anything I should be trying to push through. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.